I'm Evelyn Weaver, and my topic is embryonic stem cell research, scientific breakthroughs, societal changes, and ethical controversy. Since its discovery, HIV was thought treatable but not curable. In 2010, patient Timothy Brown was cured of HIV thanks to stem cell research. Bone marrow transplantation replaced Brown's immune system with one resistant to HIV. The mutated gene found in Brown's donor that made him immune, the CRR5 gene, is too scarce to use for the current 1.1 million HIV patients in the United States, but research is being done to uncover more about the mutation. However, the ethics of stem cell research, especially embryonic cells, is highly controversial. The majority of embryonic stem cells are obtained through in vitro fertilization, whether embryos are created purely for research purposes or left over from fertility treatments. Stem cell research has been a widely argued topic since it arose in 1981, but it has led to scientific accomplishments, with ongoing research to treat blindness, Alzheimer's, autism, hearing loss, and an abundance of other issues. The relevance of stem cell research to modern society raises the question: should scientists be able to use human embryos created in vitro for stem cell research despite the philosophical controversy? The scientific accomplishments achieved through stem cell research are indisputable, but the ethics demand a compromise. This leads me to my thesis that stem cell research should continue using leftover embryos created in vitro for fertility treatments. Because of the monumental scientific breakthroughs, the science of stem cell research must be considered. According to the National Institutes of Health, or the NIH, America's medical research agency, embryonic stem cells are pluripotent, meaning they can develop into any cell in the body, while adult stem cells are multipotent and can only develop into some. Writer Matthew Warren addresses the case in which an anonymous second patient was cured of HIV through a bone marrow transplant, which is one of 10 available stem cell therapies as of 2016. The California Stem Cell Agency, or the CSCA, acknowledges that treatments using embryonic stem cells are still on the long path towards approval, but have great potential shown through the thousands of patents involving embryonic stem cells, including methods to treat breast cancer, identify leukemic stem cells, and reprogram cells. The accomplishments are transforming science as we know it. Being highly controversial, stem cell research should be considered through the social lens. As I mentioned earlier, my research question was, should scientists be able to use human embryos created in vitro for stem cell research despite the philosophical controversy? The internet is an important point in answering this question because the dialogue it facilitates affects public opinion. Edward Kessler, Master of Business Engineering, explains that the internet allows people that normally would never interact to converse and recognize similarities in their views. Pew Research data corresponds with Gallup poll data showing Kessler's claim in action between 2002 and 2018. In that time span, average internet use increased by about 37%, and public support for embryonic stem cell research increased by 14%. The correlation implies that increasing internet use facilitates discussion that leads to changes in public opinion. Often, individuals only pay mind to a topic when it affects their own personal life. For example, Ron Reagan presented a speech advocating for embryonic stem cell research, but only after his father, former President Ronald Reagan, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. The internet adds a new plane to compassion by allowing people to see through someone else's eyes, potentially someone suffering from a disease that embryonic stem cell research could cure. This returns to Kessler's earlier point, that the internet is a platform where people who could possibly not meet in reality can share their experiences. The internet is transforming the public's involvement and investment in stem cells. The ethics behind the controversy of stem cell research are vital to fully understanding the topic. The analytical argument is to grant embryos little to no moral status. The common ground is using embryos left over from fertility treatments. Elizabeth Harmon, professor of philosophy, claims that creating an embryo for the purpose of stem cell research is unethical because scientists are consciously depriving it of a chance to live. Authors Agatha Sagan and Peter Singer counter Harmon and write that if an embryo has moral status because it has the potential to become an adult human, every stem cell must be precious. This logic is simply flawed because it means that all stem cells, even ones from adults, have moral standing. The subjectiveness of ethics makes it nearly impossible to come to a consensus, but there is a particular form of stem cell research that is most widely supported, using embryos created in vitro for parents who are biologically incapable of having children. P. Patel, author for the Journal of Medical Ethics, writes that during in vitro fertilization, multiple embryos are created, and only the healthiest is implanted into the mother. Leftover embryos are frozen for potential future use, or are discarded if the parents don't want more children. However, there are an estimated 400,000 leftover embryos in the United States that can be used for stem cell research. Harmon is more accepting of this idea, writing that although the embryo's chance to live would decrease from low to none, the embryo probably wouldn't get to live anyway. Arthur L. Kaplan, professor of bioethics, fills a gap in Patel's research. He found that of 175 in vitro fertility clinics that dispose of embryos, only 112 donate them to science. More embryos should be donated for scientific research instead of being discarded with no benefit. The opposing side believes that the creation and destruction of human embryos to obtain stem cells is unnecessary and unethical due to the existence of adult stem cells. Dr. Ingrid Kuhnle claims that the potential for adult stem cells is sufficient to use in stem cell therapy and avoids the array of ethical issues that rise from using embryonic cells. Further, the NIH mentions recently discovered cells that come from adult stem cells and are still pluripotent. However, all other adult stem cells are multipotent. Embryonic stem cells generally offer much more developmental potential, and the NIH acknowledges that no one knows yet if the two types differ in clinically significant ways. More research is necessary before these cells replace embryonic stem cells. The other aspect addresses whether it is ethical to create and destroy embryos for stem cell research, but ethics always vary due to personal philosophy and religion. The only undeniable evidence is the scientific benefits from stem cell research. Due to the controversiality of stem cell research, all aspects must be considered to reach a compromise. Jyoti Bhojwani, who has her doctoral degree at the School of Life Sciences, addresses the success in retrieving stem cell lines with one cell from multiple embryos. This process has limitations, considering that it's more tedious than traditional methods and yields less abundant results. Additionally, the embryos haven't yet survived through this process, but that could potentially be achieved with more funding. This method could resolve the ethical issue if embryos are successfully preserved during research. Sarah Chan, who has her doctorate of philosophy in bioethics, proposes extending the 14-day rule, a current regulation that mandates an embryo not be developed for greater than 14 days. Although it would be tedious to tamper with the balance of science, society, ethics, and policy, researchers could simply achieve more with more time. One of the most cooperative solutions is for researchers to use embryos left over from fertility treatments for stem cell research with the consent of the parents. This solution, like most, is limited because bills proposing similar ideas have failed, like the Stem Cell Research Advancement Act of 2010. Public opinion and congressional consensus may be equally difficult to shift. However, Kessler's identified increase in internet use for spreading ideas suggests that a shift in overall opinion may be possible. This solution would appeal ethically because embryos would be created to start families rather than to retrieve stem cells. The only embryos used would be frozen embryos marked for disposal, which appeases ethics and could save millions through scientific breakthroughs. Thank you.
Evelyn, thank you. The first question, what evidence did you gather that you didn't use, either in the paper or presentation, and why did you choose not to use it?
So some of my information that I gathered that I didn't incorporate into my presentation, I originally found some sources to compare the ethics of abortion to the ethics of stem cell research, specifically creating embryos specifically to retrieve stem cells. I was going to put Stephen Griffith, author in Public Affairs Quarterly, in conversation with Elizabeth Harmon, who's a professor of philosophy, because both discuss abortion, stem cell research, embryos, and fetuses. However, with a presentation with a time limit and a paper with a word count, it was a little too complicated to be able to fit into those.
Okay, thank you. And the second question, how does your conclusion respond to any of the other research or sources you examined?
My conclusion responds particularly to the ethical sources I used. My conclusion was that leftover embryos from in vitro fertility treatments should be donated to science. It's actually the common ground between my sources Agatha Sagan, Peter Singer, and Elizabeth Harmon. When compared, they disagreed on the moral standing of embryos, but they did find common ground on the embryos left over from fertility treatments. So I put them in ongoing debate and concluded on their common ground.
Okay, well, thank you.